video 4, and this video is focused on the biogeochemical cycle. Here I am. Hey. This is focused on biogeochemical cycles. We'll look at the 3 major cycles and then briefly consider how humans impact these. So first, let's get to this term, biogeochemical. It's a mouthful. What's it refer to? We're talking here about chemicals. Technically, we're talking about elements, but let's call them chemicals just for fun. We're talking about chemicals that are going to be circulating or moving through a cycle where there is a biologic or a living part of their pathway or their cycle, and there's also a non-living part where this chemical may be in the atmosphere or in the rocks or in the water, and you'll see examples of all those in a second. So we're going to look at 3 cycles here briefly: carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Why? Who cares about carbon? Who cares about nitrogen or phosphorus? We won't get into all the uses for these particular elements. Let's just briefly touch on a couple. Carbon is vital to life. That is, when you think about, whenever you hear the term organic chemistry refers to carbon. Carbon is the foundation for many molecules. You may see a molecule that, if you look in the book, you may see C linked to a C, linked to a C, and this may go on for hundreds of these carbon chains because carbon is a key element in producing complex molecules. When we talk about life, one other characteristic we can mention about life is it's carbon-based for the most part. So carbon is key, so we need to look at how carbon moves or cycles. Nitrogen. Nitrogen, which is abbreviated N, nitrogen is needed for lots of reasons. I just highlighted one here, proteins. It's going to be a key ingredient in the production of proteins, and proteins are found in all living things. And it's also a major factor in plant growth. If you go to the store and you see fertilizer for your plants, you may see something called NPK fertilizer, or you may see something like, oh, that's a 10, 10, hard to write on this, 10, 10, 10 fertilizer. That refers to the ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that fertilizer. Some is like 20:0:0, which is strong nitrogen. But nitrogen is going to be a key factor for plant growth, which is why we highlight it here. And then phosphorus. Of course, phosphorus is up here. It's another one of those major ingredients for plant growth. But we're also going to find it in proteins and in DNA. So these are the 3 major elements that are going to cycle through living things as well as a non-living part. So let's have a look at first the carbon cycle. Let me get out of the way over here. The carbon cycle is, you probably know it mainly by thinking about CO2, carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere. So when you think about CO2 in the atmosphere, how does it get out of the atmosphere? Plants are going to take it up. Plants are going to remove CO2 and they're going to take it in, so they get their source of carbon and they use that as part of photosynthesis. Animals then eat the plants. As animals eat plants, animals, as part of our metabolism, are going to be releasing CO2. So whenever we breathe out, we release a little bit of CO2. So that's how CO2 can re-enter the atmosphere. It also re-enters as living things die and they're broken down by bacteria. CO2 will go back into the atmosphere. So you can see right here, there's sort of this nice little loop of cycling. Carbon does move in and out of water in the atmosphere, and that's good because some sea creatures are going to use carbon to make up their shells. You may have heard the term carbonate, calcium carbonate. That's the major ingredient of shells. So that's going to be another form of carbon that you'll see here. Obviously, this part is more on the geo side. This is going to be the non-living part of the cycle. There is actually a bunch of carbon that is actually either in, well, it's in different forms. It's going to be as coal or oil or natural gas. You have heard the term fossil fuel. What is a fossil fuel? This stuff, many millions of years ago, used to be live organisms. They died, chemically changed over millions of years, and now we call them oil, or now it's coal, or it's natural gas. What we do is obviously we extract this out, and then we use this in our plants and our factories, our electrical generating plants. Well, because this stuff used to be alive, it contained carbon. When we burn it, whenever we burn anything, if you burn wood in your fireplace or you burn fossil fuels, you're going to release carbon oxides. You're going to release CO2 in particular. Well, the concern that we have is that CO2 seems to be linked to increasing global temperature. So whenever you hear a term global climate change, you may hear the term, it's sort of a bad term, global warming, but whenever you hear that term global climate change, it's linked to or connected to increasing levels of CO2. Over the last 150 years or so, we've seen our fossil fuel use go like this. We've also seen our CO2 levels go right along with it. So there is a strong connection between CO2 levels and the burning of fossil fuels. And we'll deal with that issue a little bit more later. Let's go on and have a look at another cycle. Let's look at the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is also, we'll start with its air component. Nitrogen is very prominent in the air. N2 is nitrogen gas. And you see here, it's about 78% of air. The rest of air is oxygen and CO2 and other gases and pollutants. But most of the nitrogen is actually in the form of a nitrogen gas. Well, this is great. This is how we can get it, right? No. We breathe this in and out, and we don't actually absorb any of it. This form of nitrogen we cannot use. In fact, no animals can use this form of nitrogen. The only way we can use this nitrogen is if bacteria in the soil and the water, if they actually fix it. A little hard to see down here, but if they fix it. Fix it here doesn't mean it was broken. It means they chemically convert it to a form that plants can use. So when you see this nitrate ions here, that just means we've converted nitrogen to a different form, and now plants can use it to make plants. Animals get their nitrogen by eating plants. We get our nitrogen by eating the plants, salads, or by eating Bessie the cow or other animals, and we get nitrogen that way. So as we get nitrogen, then we can use it for our tissues. When plants die or when animals die, the nitrogen returns to the soil, and then decomposer bacteria take the nitrogen from the dying stuff and actually put the nitrogen back into the atmosphere so it returns. Great. You sort of see the cycle there. Humans can have an impact here as well because humans will use nitrates for fertilizers. Whenever we want to grow a lot of crops, we put down fertilizer. Some of that fertilizer, though, does wash into rivers and streams and surface water and does cause some pretty serious issues that we'll address later. And we also, by burning fossil fuels, we can actually release forms of nitrogen into the atmosphere. And when it falls back down, it falls as nitric acid, which contributes to acid rain. That's a problem too. One more cycle to consider, and that's the phosphorus cycle. I'll come over here. The phosphorus cycle is a little bit different in that you see a better cycle right here, which is phosphorus that's in the soil is taken up by plants. We, animals, eat the plants. When we die or plants die, the phosphorus gets circled back around. So phosphorus is in the soil. Decomposers are going to make anything dead. They're going to release that phosphorus, and then plants are going to absorb it. Some of that phosphorus does actually leak into rivers and streams and actually forms sediment that becomes new rock. When this river changes and all of a sudden this rock is exposed, now we have exposed phosphorus. How then does it turn back into a form we can use? As water runs across the phosphorus and breaks it down, actually phosphorus can then re-enter the soil, and therefore we get the cycle. But you can see here, this can be a very long-term process. You can have phosphorus locked away as rock for a long time before it weathers and releases the phosphorus so we can get it again. We do actually we do mine phosphorus, and we use that, of course, back again to our NPK fertilizers. So we do get phosphorus, so we can use it in fertilizers. The other issue, of course, is when we use phosphorus fertilizers, that can run off into the rivers and cause problems. You're thinking, no, that's a good thing, right? Because it's forming rock. Actually, it's a bad thing because too much phosphorus or too much nitrogen is going to upset the balance of organisms that are growing in the water and lead to some problems. So this cycle is a little heavily dependent on the geo part of it because rocks are very obviously going to be a long-term locking up process of phosphorus. But you also, again, still see the cycle here of phosphorus going from plants to animals. As animals and plants die, it's decomposed and then made available again so it can go back up to plants. So those are the three cycles. And if that was not clear, go back and watch the video again so you're clear on the difference between them. But as we wrap up, I want to show you just a few thoughts here. These cycles are all important because these are the raw materials, the ingredients that living things need to survive. We all need potassium, we all need phosphorus, we all need water, we all need nitrogen. We need these parts of our cycle and need these elements to make up our tissues. Minerals, as you saw, cycle. They pass through the biogeochemical cycles, but I just want to tease you with one idea here. Energy doesn't cycle. So we'll address that issue a little bit later where energy comes into the whole ecological ecosystem conversation. Uh, Nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, water, these are all abiotic. And I'll talk more about that in our next video, what biotic and abiotic are. But these are non-living. Why then do living organisms need to have them? Sort of answered that question already. They're all critical to life. And can humans impact these cycles? Humans can impact all of these cycles, and we'll consider that more in class. That wraps up video 4.